Alrighty, so in this video what we're going to do is we are going to start on our second example. It's going to be one of those to-do application thingies that are examples that are fairly ubiquitous and fairly tiring, honestly, to see them all the time. But it's quick, it's straightforward, and it will allow us to explore some of the other things that we need to understand about React, particularly how properties propagate, and also how we can create what are called pure components. So let's go ahead and get started. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to come over here to example1.html. I'm just going to hit Control-C, Control-V, and that's going to create this example2.html file. And then I'm going to create a JavaScript file called example2.js. And then in example2.html, the changes I'm going to make is I'm going to change this example1 to example2. And the script that I'm going to reference, I'm going to change to example2. And I'm also going to throw some styles in the head, make it a little bit easier to see. I'm going to set, I'm going to do application, and I'm going to say max width is 400 px, margin is auto, and then maybe we can make the body a little bit easier on our eyes by doing background is EE. So with that, should be ready to go. If you pop open your live server, remember we've had live server running throughout this entire time. But remember, since this is a new example, I might as well show again. I am in this directory that we are currently looking at in Visual Studio Code. I'm just going to type in live-server, and that's going to serve out this directory. And so now that we're looking at this in Chrome, I can click on example2.html, and we see that our example2 is like that. So yeah, stuff and things. Let's get started. In example2.js, we are going to start off by creating a component called application. So we're going to say class, well, actually, we're going to call it app component. Extends react.component. Now, when you create a component, always get in the habit of writing a render method, because the render method is obviously the most important part of a component. And then just to get it out of the way, we're going to go ahead and say react dom.render, and we're going to render app component into document.getElementById, and we're going to pass in the application. So we're going to mount to that same application node. And now we have a very, very, very simple React application that does absolutely nothing, except throws an error because we're not returning anything from render, but that's okay. So when creating a React application, particularly a simple application where we're not going to have external stores, remember that state box with quotes around it in the earlier overview? Well, or the model, sorry. We're not going to have a very complex model. In this example, our model code is going to be integrated directly into our components themselves. And what we're going to do is the app component is going to be responsible for the entire state of the application. This is a very common thing you'll see in React applications, where you have a top-level component that contains all the state and all the behavior that you want, and then it delegates its view, the things that actually render, the most important parts that render to the DOM, to subcomponents. So in this example is all about seeing the communication between multiple components. So I'm going to create a constructor. And remember, when you create a constructor using the syntax, always accept a props and always pass it into super. Now, it's not going to make much of a difference because we're not passing any props into app component, but get into the habit of doing that. Because in certain situations where you do not accept this parameter, do not forward it to the super constructor, you will forget that you didn't do it, and then you'll be wondering why things are behaving oddly when you start trying to pass props into them. So get into the habit of doing that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the state. So I'm going to say this.state equals, I'm going to create an object. And I'll just show you guys the model, kind of the top-level model of what this entire application is going to do. So it's going to have a filter, and the filter is going to have a show completed set to true, a Boolean called show completed. And it's also going to have a to-dos, which is going to be an array. And I'm just going to put in, what What I'm actually going to do is above creating this dot state, I'm going to say this dot underscore to indicate a private field. Of course, the underscore doesn't do anything magical as far as JavaScript is concerned. Generally speaking, when you have an underscore in a class like this in JavaScript, it indicates that it's a private field and should not be manipulated outside of this class. I'm going to say next to-do ID, and I'm going to set that to 1. Then for my to-dos array, I'm going to say for the first one, I'm going to do this next to-do ID plus text, it doesn't matter, is completed false. And I'm just going to copy and paste this 4 times. And let's do is completed true on the middle too, I guess. And let's change their text. So this is our model of our application. It's just a single JavaScript object that represents the single source of truth of the entirety of the program. So it's important to understand that that's how conceptually our top level component kind of owns the entirety of the state of the application, all the way down to the smallest component. And then it'll propagate this data into those subcomponents. So let's go ahead and the first thing we want to do here is let's deal with our show completed form. So I'm not going to create a subcomponent for this. I'm going to keep the filter on the app component itself. So let's go ahead. Remember, we need one top level element. So that'll be a div for our render call. Then inside of that, we can do whatever we want. So I'm going to pass in, I'm going to do an H1, how about an H2, to-do list again, and then a label. Inside of the label, I'm going to say show completed. And inside of that, I'm going to have an input with a type of checkbox, a checked equaling our filter show completed. So I want to extract the filter out of our state. So on the render, I'm going to say const filter equals this dot state. Notice the curlies. This is using the object deconstruction syntax. And then for my input, I'm going to say checked equals filter.showCompleted. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event handler for onChange. And this is going to point to a function that doesn't exist yet, but we will make that function exist. Let's break this out a little bit because we're... Actually, you know what? We really don't even need to have this HTML file open. So the onChange is going to pass into this dot onShowCompletedClicked, which is a function that doesn't exist yet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the function. So I'm going to do show completed clicked. It's going to receive an event. Now, before I implement the on show completed clicked, how about on show completed changed? That's better. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and pre-bind this function. So I'm going to come up here to my constructor, and I'm going to say this on show completed change equals this on show completed change bind this. So I just want to do that before I forget. Always get in the habit of doing that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot, let's see, set state. And I'm going to set state to filter equals show completed equals e.target.checked. So the e is the event object that gets passed in. So I'm setting the state and changing it, changing the filter to a new object. Now it's important to understand that the set state function does not do a deep merge. It does a shallow merge, meaning the entire filter object is going to be replaced by this. So if we had other parameters on our filter object, we would have to use something like object.assign, or use the object spread operator, which is a stage 3 proposal feature, which will probably make its way into, hopefully, the next version of JavaScript. But with this done, I'll just scroll through this if you want to take a look at this code. It's pretty straightforward. We just set up our state. We have one event handler, one form element. We can come over here to our code. We can open up our React, and we can look at the filter object. And when I uncheck this, notice how show completed is now false. Notice how it changes. Also notice that if I trace the React updates, a new render is invoked every time I check or uncheck show completed. Now it doesn't do anything except change the show completed state. So let's go ahead and actually write a component that will list out our to-dos. So this component, I'm going to create a... Actually, we're going to do this in the next video because this is going to be a stateless, pure component. And I want to give it a little bit of time to discuss how we're going to do that. But basically, what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to create a new component that will loop through the array of these to-dos and print them out onto the screen. So we'll see you guys then.